What if Napoleon conquered the world? A mind-bending scenario. Picture this, it's 1812, and Napoleon Bonaparte, standing on the smoldering ruins of Moscow, suddenly has a light bulb moment. Why stop at Europe? The world is out there waiting for him, fueled by sheer ambition, and possibly an extra croissant that morning. Napoleon sets his sights on global domination. What could possibly go wrong? The march begins. With his trademark military swagger, Napoleon kicks off his world tour. Like some rock star of war, his army, a bunch of hardened veterans who, by this point, have probably forgotten what home even looks like. Let's just say, if you were a French soldier back then, you'd better have liked baguettes and endless marching. Imagine his generals, like Marshal Ney, sitting around a campfire after yet another battle. So, we've conquered Europe. What's next? Ney asks, half joking. Napoleon, eyes gleaming, replies, "The world, mon ami. Pack your bags, we're heading to India next." And off they go, much to the dismay of anyone who thought they'd finally get a weekend off. Clashing with cultures. Now, Napoleon wasn't just a master of military strategy, he was a man with a vision. He'd walk into a country and say, "Bonjour. Here's my Napoleonic Code. And by the way, you're now part of the French Empire. Vive la France." Local leaders were, understandably, a bit less enthusiastic about this arrangement. Can you imagine a conversation between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I of Russia? After the whole Moscow is burning fiasco, Napoleon goes, "Look, we've had our differences. Let's put that behind us. How about you become my vassal?" To which Alexander probably responded, "How about you go freeze in Siberia?" Legal reforms for everyone. Despite the chaos, Napoleon's legal reforms weren't all bad. He'd show up in some distant land, say Egypt, and whip out his Napoleonic Code. Equality, citizenship, secular laws. The locals would cheer, but behind their polite smiles, they'd probably be thinking, who is this short guy? And why is he so obsessed with law books? But here's the kicker. Napoleon loved efficiency. Imagine him visiting the Ottoman Empire and, in classic French style, offering unsolicited advice on bureaucracy. "You see, sultans," Napoleon would say, "the key to good governance is paperwork. Lots of it, in triplicate. Trust me. I've been doing this 4 years." One can only imagine the Ottoman officials nodding along, wondering how quickly they could get him on the next ship back to France. French culture takes over, of course. As Napoleon spread his empire, French culture followed. Soon, half the world was sipping wine, learning French phrases, and pretending to enjoy snails. Picture British aristocrats, typically fond of tea and biscuits, now awkwardly raising glasses of Bordeaux and muttering liberté, eagle-eyed, fraternite, while secretly wishing for a scone. But not everyone was ready to embrace the French way. In Spain, for example, people weren't exactly thrilled with their new French overlords. Guerrilla warfare erupted, and locals would snicker as they watched French soldiers struggle with the midday heat. "Vive la resistance," they'd whisper from the shadows as Napoleon's troops trudged by, sweaty and bewildered. Economic shenanigans. Economically, it wasn't all croissants and champagne either. Napoleon's dream was to turn the world's economy into one big French-controlled machine. But instead of free trade and prosperity, many regions got the short end of the stick. Imagine some merchant in India trying to figure out why he now has to pay taxes to a guy sitting in Paris who's never even been to India. What's next? He'd grumble. Do I have to wear one of those funny French hats too? Technological rush, but credit where credit's due. Napoleon would have pushed the world forward in terms of technology. Sure, it might have been driven by his obsession with conquering new lands, but we can thank him for speeding up communication. Picture him, furiously scribbling letters on horseback, wishing the telegraph had been invented a few decades earlier. Maybe with quicker communication, he wouldn't have ended up stranded in Russia without winter coats for his troops. And speaking of troops, Napoleon wasn't above using new tech to get an edge in battle. Imagine him hearing about the early experiments with steam engines, steam-powered cannons. "Tell me more," he'd exclaim. Meanwhile, his generals would just sigh, knowing that their emperor's appetite for invention was as big as his ambition for conquest. The downfall. But as with all great things, or in Napoleon's case, all massive empires, cracks would start to form. The world, as it turns out, isn't too fond of being ruled by one guy with a Napoleon complex. Revolts would pop up everywhere, from Spain to South America, and let's not forget Britain, standing defiantly on its island, drinking tea and plotting Napoleon's downfall while singing Rule, Britannia. Ultimately, Napoleon's global empire might have lasted a few decades, but keeping so many cultures, languages, and egos in check would have been impossible. Even for someone as brilliant as him, his downfall would come not just from enemy armies, but from the very people he tried to rule. Final thought. So, what would a world under Napoleon look like? A blend of French culture, legal reforms, and a lot of unhappy locals, resisting every step of the way. Sure, there'd be some progress, but there'd also be enough chaos and rebellion to keep history books busy for centuries. One thing's for sure, it would have been an adventure.